Who are the top 10 American poets of all time? And today we are going to be doing a deep dive into some of the most influential authors of all time. And this is the hardest list that I have ever had to make on this channel, ranking books or authors. Because there are dozens of American poets who deserve way more attention than they get. And so today in this presentation, I'm not only just going to run through a list and briefly discuss these poets, I'm going to show you their poetry so you understand the power of their work. Because something that I've noticed is that poetry is criminally underread by lovers of fiction and literature. You know, people in university and high school read through the typical classics and have maybe picked up T.S. Eliot and a couple other people along the way. But there are so many poets who I learned about in university that I didn't even know existed. And so I'm sure there are going to be some controversial picks in here because some of the greats, some of the American canonical poets are going to be left out. But that's what I do on Wright Conscious. I expose you guys to transformative authors who can change your life right now. And that's why poetry is so beautiful. To read something like Gravity's Rainbow or Pale Fire, you have to first and foremost sit down for hours. Then you have to have precursory knowledge and the will to finish it to get the reward at the end. But many great poems could be given to even high schoolers. And I'm a high school English teacher and do this all the time. And it can create an immediate impact. And poetry is beautiful because it changes your perception. It shows you because its emotions and experiences strip down to their core essence. So you can kind of take that model of seeing or feeling and implant it into your own reality. And it's awesome. As with fiction, it's more of a slow burn, which is great. And so if you guys are interested in more poetry videos, I have a poetry playlist here on the channel where I've talked about many of these poets before. And I also talk about writing, fiction, and a ton of other cool stuff on the channel if you are interested. And so without any further ado, I want to ask you guys a question. If I said, hey, Johnny, hey, Sally, what state do you think produced the most great poets here in America? Let's say even in the 20th century. What would you tell me? I'll give you a second to think. You're probably thinking California, New York, Texas, Florida, Washington, Oregon, kind of the big name states with high populations. But in actuality, as we're about to discuss here in a second and throughout the video, one of the best states for poetry is actually Minnesota. Yes, and the OG Minnesota poet, the chairman of the board, one of the most influential American poets of all time, is not Bob Dylan, who is from Minnesota, who was given the Nobel Prize in Literature by the corrupt Nobel Prize Committee so that they could delay giving it to another American for another decade or two. But in actuality, the real Minnesota poets, the real American poets that run circles around Bob. And let me just say, I love Bob Dylan. I love his music. And Bob is so influential because he existed in the medium of music, which had the radio, which enabled his music to be distributed to anyone across the world, and people could listen with little to no effort. You cannot read a book of poems while driving around on the highway. You can, but most people don't. And so I am actually going to add two poets right now who are from Minnesota, and it is none other than James Wright and Robert Bllee. And this list of top 10 is not ranked. I don't view these guys as number 1 and number 2 necessarily. But if you are skeptical and you're maybe triggered by my Bob Dylan accusation, let me tell you this. Bob Dylan wrote anti-war songs, Masters of War. The times are a-changin', blowing in the wind, a hard rain's gonna fall, which are, not as anti-war. Think about those songs, great songs. And if you compare that, and we're gonna read some in a second, to the anti-war poetry that Bllee and Wright were also writing in the 1960s, and if you showed it to someone and put it side by side on a piece of paper to an educated person, they would be like, this guy, Bob Dylan, is like a child. These guys, this is insane. What is this? And I get that songwriting and poetry are different mediums and you have to hold yourself back in songwriting. But nonetheless, Bllee and Wright are not only impactful in terms of their actual poetry, which we're going to discuss in a second, but James Wright and Robert Bllee brought many of the most famous poets of modern readership, people like Rumi, Pablo Neruda, and many others into the light with their translations. If it wasn't for Robert Bllee, we would have no idea, most likely, who Pablo Neruda or other great poets were. Bllee and Wright were basically the vanguard trying to hold poetry together before it descended into what it is today. Because there are great poets today, but poetry, a lot of modern poetry, basically sucks and does not live up to many of the people that we're going to be talking about today. And so first and foremost, they are on this list because they did that. Their translations and the power of their translations, especially if you look at like some of the original language and what they did, are immense. I am currently translating Rainer Marie Rilke's Sonnets to Orpheus for my Desert Orpheus poetry book that is coming out very soon in the next couple months. And Robert Bllee actually did some translations of some of the Rilke poems I'm doing. And it's really hard because when I look at the other translations, I'm like, I want to do a better job. Like, this is 2025. Like, I have to take this to the next level. And I'm kind of like, shit, man, this is really, really hard with some of the poems he's done. Cause I was like, this is perfect. And so what Bllee and Wright represent in American poetry is this middle ground between modernism and postmodernism, because we all know about the modernist poets, and we could even throw like Robert Frost, was slightly older, Wallace Stevens, all these people that we're going to talk about a little bit later into that group. Then we have the postmodernist poets or the proto-postmodernist poets like John Berryman and others. And then that's kind of moved into modern poetry. But our conception of the bridge between modernism and postmodernism is the beats. But I love the beats. There are people like Jack Spicer, Michael McClure, and others who, if I had a top 25 list, would definitely be on it. Allen Ginsberg and whatnot. But the beat movement, this is a hot take, had kind of weak writing. It was stemming from emotions and stemming from this Zen spirit. But James Wright and Robert Bllee had felt that, but had none of the LSD, orgy, San Francisco energy because they were farm boys from Minnesota. Robert Bllee and James Wright were these farm boys who, went to university, went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and then returned to Minnesota and were disciplined, were sitting on their farms, working, on their farms and just writing poetry. And that's what they were doing. They were translating all these great Chinese poets. And, it's very, very similar to the beat movement, but they were doing it in a more authentic way. I view the beat movement as more of a showmanship. They were, and more performative, and that's great. But I think that Bllee, Wright, and some others who were more in line with them, and I could even throw Gary Snyder in here, who was a beat poet who more aligned with Bllee and Wright, they were actually doing it. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let me show you guys. So the core, especially of Bllee and Wright's early poetry, is this idea of radical plainness. Because if you look at a lot of more modern and postmodernist poetry, it's really fueled on this idea that you have to be experimental, that you have to be ambitious, that you have to have all this stuff going on. And that's not necessarily true. Ambition is one of the biggest killers of kind of this short-term creativity. For instance, if you want to write Gravity's Rainbow, my God, you're going to have to be very ambitious, because eventually your motivation is going to fade and you have 5,000 or 6,000 hours of work to go before you finish. But if you want to be a poet, which is really about taking these feelings or taking these transcendent experiences that you've witnessed out in the world and putting it on paper, that shouldn't be ambitious. You shouldn't need technical training necessarily to do that. And this is how the German romantics, Hölderlin, Novalis, even people like Goethe, and then the Spanish symbolists, Machado, Vallejo, Lorca, all these other people, they figured this out. Rilke, they all figured out that William Blake, in the English tradition, that real poetry is on the inward journey. It's inside. And sometimes the best way to go inside is actually through nature, using nature as a vehicle to go inward. That's what pagan society did a lot of the time. And so Bllee and Wright started to contemplate this idea: how can we be radical without being what they called versifiers on the page? Because they viewed all these academic poets, John Berryman and others in the university, as just sitting there and technically trying to write the best poem. And this is what many people are doing today. But Bllee and Wright were more aligned with the beat idea of, what if we had such a transcendent experience and had a nice base of writing skills that the poem just basically comes out and we do a little bit of revising and then it's done. And we don't lose that authentic experience. And so, speaking of ambition, Robert Bllee writes in his poem, Watering the Horse, "How strange to think of giving up all ambition. Suddenly I see with such clear eyes the white flake of snow that has just fallen in the horse's mane." And I want you guys to look at this. So he starts with, how strange is it in this world of endless ambition, especially in the writing world? How radical of an idea is that? And what happens when you do? Well, when you do it, you start to see with clear eyes nature. And this is what Rilke figured out. So Rilke studied under Rodin. And Rilke is a German poet who is an absolute GOAT. Like, he's in for sure the top 10 of all time list. But Rilke studied under the sculptor Rodin, who did like The Gates of Hell and The Thinking Man and all this stuff. And Rodin made him study like an artist. He made Rilke go out and sit at the zoo or at a statue and just look at it. And this connects back to the shamanic experience in the East and the West. And so something that the West didn't figure out on its journey through Christianity, which figured out many other things. When people hear me talk about Christianity, especially people who are religious, they act like Christianity got it all right. But anytime you force a singular vision onto something, just like how the East missed out on a lot, there are things left unobserved. And that's what was great about this unification at the start of the 20th century between East and West, is that we finally got to merge these kind of strengths and weaknesses into each other. And one of the weaknesses of the West is that there was actually no real template of learning to see other than the contemplation by monks of divine images, like with a candle flame. And there's some stuff like that, but that's like pretty juvenile when you look at the East, where they had been studying dharana and dhyana and samadhi, the three different types of meditation, for thousands of years. And because of the temperate weather and stuff over in, India and other places in the East, they could just sit and basically be outside a lot of the time, or be in the not so radical areas of northern India where it was cold but not too cold, and be able to just sit in caves and work on this stuff. And one of the things that they figured out is that our reality is subjective, that we project many of our biases onto a situation. Now, if anyone's ever taken psychedelics before, that's what's happening. You're being forced to see a more objective reality and what's actually happening. And Rilke says in his first Duino Elegies poem that, if we all saw angels or God for what it really was, we'd be terrified and we'd most likely actually die. This is kind of what happens at the end of the Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull movie, when the lady gets all the knowledge and says, "Oh my God, I don't want this anymore. Please stop." But in Christianity, there is less emphasis on enlightenment in the now and also the obtaining of mystical states. And so in Eastern Orthodoxy, there's this idea of theosis or deification or divinization, where you want to merge with God through a divine life, through a more karmic yoga type mentality. One could say this is like a Gnostic kind of point of view too, of it, through gnosis trying to merge with the God above God. But most Catholic and Protestant sects don't believe in this. And if they do, they don't have the frameworks to be able to do this. Because what this actually is, what theosis is at an objective level, is trying to obtain a mystical state, which in actuality is a unification with the oneness of our reality. And maybe it's a unification with the God, the God, or the pantheon of gods. But even if you're an atheist, there is this inherent connectedness in the world. And that's what these mystical states kind of lead you toward. And what's funny is that when you do this process, you actually become less ambitious and less creative. And I know there's the Tale of the Genji and plenty of other masterpieces from the East, but on a pound for pound level, the West has produced far more literary masterpieces before, let's say, the 20th century started than the East ever did, because of the ambition, because of the competition, because of many other factors. But one of it is because if you have the time and the energy, which most of the time it's more aristocratic or rebellious individuals, to merge with God and attain a mystical state, then that ambition filters away. And so learning to see in the new world from an American context is what Bllee and Wright were trying to do. They were trying to shed filters. And the first people that actually did this in the history of poetry was the Chinese poets, Han Shan, aka Cold Mountain, Li Po, and others. And so Bllee and Wright started to translate these guys which Ezra Pound and the modernists started, but they had more information and started to realize like, oh my God, this is a totally different type of poetry, and started to explore that. And so now that we're talking about Bllee, actually, right above this poem, there's just a random one that we can read. It's called Snowfall in the November Afternoon. The grass is half covered with snow. It was the kind of snowfall that starts in late afternoon. And now the little houses of the grass are growing dark. If I reached my hands down near the earth, I could take handfuls of darkness. That darkness was always there, which we never noticed. As the snow grows heavier, the corn stalks fade farther away, and the barn moves nearer to the house. The barn moves all alone in the growing storm. The barn is full of corn and moving toward us now, like a hulk blown toward us in a storm at sea. All the sailors on deck have been blind for many years. And so this is a good example, actually, of some of this radical plainness of allowing mythology to re-enter the poem, because something that happened, and Robert Bllee has a great book on this called News of the Universe, which I have right here, is that there was a divorce between poetry and nature because of Christianity and the idea in Genesis that humans are above and disconnected from nature, that we are higher on the hierarchy. And he shows systematically through showing poetry and giving commentary how that position was created, how poets like John Milton, Alexander Pope, John Donne, Matthew Arnold, Jonathan Swift, all the classic Christian poets viewed nature as this thing to dominate, as this lesser and evil thing. And then he shows the restoration of it. He shows how mostly German Romanticism and William Blake, Wordsworth, and others started to restore that into art. And then how, in modernism, it basically exploded again. And like I said, you can disagree in the sense that maybe you believe that we're above nature, but that's what happened. And we were forced to do that. And art was forced to do that, mostly at mass. And there are some exceptions, but that's what happened. And there was a restoration. And so Bllee and Wright, in my opinion, are actually the end of this restoration. We don't have many good nature poets or people who are seeing anymore. And like my goal is actually to kind of walk in their lineage, hopefully, and stand on their shoulders, even though there's this huge gap between me and them. And so another thing that can happen is, as we see, is that in many of the Christian poems, mythology was also cut away and replaced with biblical symbolism, which is great, which is powerful because it's an old text, but then because it's been programmed into us over time. People will say the Bible is the most influential thing in the world. Yeah, because it was mandated on us. We went through the Dark Ages and through a time that was the only thing that we could use as a reference. Of course, it's the most influential thing in the West. There could be another book. We could literally have transported the Gita over here and given the Bible to the East. And if that was mandated for 2,000 years as the one-all be-all text, it would be the most influential and greatest book of all time. And I'm not discounting the power of the Bible. I'm just saying that there was a rediscovery of many of the old pathways that pagan society, which was doing poetry and oral storytelling, had figured out, which was powerful because that all predates Christianity. And so it's also an interesting time because, until the 20th century, we didn't have anthropologically, I think is the word, or archaeologically, I'm probably fucking that up, access to many of these old texts. Like we had found many of these old myths and texts, and they were brought back to us. And so kind of this middle zone of modernism and Bllee, they were all rediscovering these old tales and being able to talk about them and explore about them and create a bridge back to them with our modern conceptions for the first time ever. And that's what you were seeing there with the stuff about the sea that Bllee was doing there. And so we'll hop over to Wright really fast, and we'll get into some anti-war poetry by Bllee so I can back up the statement that I said earlier about Bob Dylan. So next we have one of Wright's most famous poems, one that is included in many anthologies, but it's a good place to start. Lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly, asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life. This right here is absolutely awesome poetry. We see so much contrast going on, so much nostalgia, use of color. It's radically plain. And then at the end kind of promotes this moral idea, because what is he saying? Is he saying that he's wasted his life because he hasn't been at William Duffy's farm, just contemplating life, and he's been too ambitious? Or has he wasted his life because he hasn't been too ambitious at all? So it makes you think. And I show this to my kids a lot. And it's funny, depending on how they feel about life, this poem, their answer to the question I just asked, like, what is he kind of saying here, is different. And nonetheless can still help you slow down or speed up. I have many students who feel like they're going to be stuck in our small town forever, who have been kind of living this lifestyle more in poverty, and they want to go do something big. Then there are others whose parents want them to be anesthesiologists, and they're like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. And having a day off at a farm in a hammock would be the best thing in the world for them. And many of us are in a very similar position. And I love the titling, as we're about to see in some other poems from Wright. He's placing us back in like a temporal place, like a real place. We're at this farm in Minnesota. So in this poem, it's a great example. To the evening star, central Minnesota. Under the water tower at the edge of town, a huge Airedale ponders a long ripple in the grass fields beyond. Miles off, a whole grove silently flies up into the darkness. One light comes on in the sky, one lamp on the prairie. Beautiful daylight of the body, your hands carry seashells. West of this wide plain, animals wilder than ours come down from the green mountains in the darkness. Now they can see you. They know the open meadows are safe. And so I'll come over here and go into teacher mode and break this one down for you guys. And so seemingly this is about a man and a woman who are walking, and they're out in the field with their dog. So under the water tower at the edge of town, which is reorienting us back into a nostalgic, typical American town. There's this Airedale Terry, which is a dog, who's playing out in the field, and it's sunset. Many of us, after a day of work, that's what my wife and I do. We're at the start of the day, sunrise, sunset, we go and take a walk. And so they're out there, and then one light comes on in the sky, evening star. One lamp comes on the prairie, one of the houses out there. And then he shifts. So this is one of the things that makes Bllee and Wright beautiful, that they figured out, is that if you can write a love poem, this is a love poem, everyone. You can write a love poem, but one of the best ways to do it is mask it as a nature poem, mask it through this nostalgia, mask it through weight and through contrast and these things, instead of just doing a Rupi Kaur or typical love poem. So then Wright starts, beautiful daylight of the body, her body, your hands carry seashells, talking about, they're in a field. So he's talking about her femininity, the ocean female, she's beautifully feminine. West of this wide plain, animals wilder than ours. So out to the west, there's mountains. There's these green mountains, and the animals are coming down from the mountains into the darkness, most likely to hunt or do other things at night. But now they can see you, and they know the open meadows are safe. So he's saying, what a compliment that is. Instead of this love poem, you look so beautiful or whatever, he's saying that you're so feminine, you're so wonderful, that the animals, these wild animals that are wilder than our dog, which is a great kind of reference back to the top, come down and they feel safe because you're here. That's fucking wonderful. That's like, this is transformative. This is a picture. Like, I read this and I'm like, wow, I'm here. This is happening. So our next poem, are there any football fans out there? Any fans of NFL out there? Well, this is one of the best poems about football. Like, imagine, like, you like football. How do you write a poem about football? Okay. Autumn begins in Martin's Ferry, Ohio. So in small towns, even the one I'm in, like, football is a huge deal. Like, even I'm here in Arizona, like, people go crazy over it. So in the Shreve High football stadium, I think of Pollocks nursing beers in Tiltonsville, and gray faces of Negroes in the blast furnace at Benwood, and the ruptured night watchmen of Wheeling Steel dreaming of heroes. All the proud fathers are ashamed to go home. Their women cluck like starved pullets, dying for love. Therefore, their sons grow suicidally beautiful at the beginning of October and gallop terribly against each other's bodies. So let me break this down for you guys. Like, this is like mind-blowing. This is making me emotional. Like, this is so good. So this James Wright, seemingly the narrator, is at the football stadium and he's watching football, but he's daydreaming of the Polacks, so, the Polish people, these Polish workers, sitting at the bar just drinking beers really slowly. He's thinking of the black people working at the furnace. He's thinking of the security guard at the steel house. And all of them are dreaming of heroes. All of them are dreaming of something that they could be, something better, like all of us do. All of them are these proud fathers, these Polacks, these black people, the security guard. They're all ashamed to go home because their women cluck. Their women nag them like starved pullets because they are dying for love. All they want is love, right? All women want, not to speak in generalizations a lot of the time, is for their man to actually open up emotionally. And when they don't, they nag. But why are they dying for love? It's because the men are dreaming for something better. They're using that loving energy on their daydreams of becoming better. So there is a disunion at the home between these longing, sad, broken fathers and these mothers who don't have any love. And so therefore, I love this transition word right here. Therefore, their sons grow suicidally beautiful at the beginning of October and gallop terribly against each other's bodies. So therefore, their sons smash each other. I mean, football, people would get paralyzed every single year. People get hurt. I've had so many students with broken necks, legs, arms, like screwed up. They leave high school and their knees are already screwed up from football. Like, it's insane. And they're only doing that. They're experiencing this pain because they don't have any love at home. What a way to talk about football and American culture. Like, absolutely wonderful. This is we got nature in here. We got, small town stuff. We have football, but more importantly, we have this huge message, but it's not overt. It's put in this small, 12 line, beautiful poem. And so let's move on now to Robert Bly's anti-war poetry. So Robert Bly and Wright and many others during the Vietnam War were pissed off, like everyone should be. Like, why the fuck are we doing this? And they wrote the best anti-war poetry, or I think the best anti-war art of all time. Like, there's so much from that era that's just so good because they were all at peak level. They're all like 30s, 40s, had been trained in the academy, but then went back and were, living as poets for a while, gaining power. And then this emotional event that people hated happened, and it brought the best in terms of art out of everyone, including the music scene and the visual art scene and others. And the movie scenes, like we have like these crazy movies. So here we go. Massive engines lift beautifully from the deck. Wings appear over the trees, wings with 800 rivets. Engines burning 1,000 gallons of gasoline a minute sweep over the huts with dirt floors. The chickens feel the new fear deep in the pits of their beaks. Buddha with Padma Sambhava. Meanwhile, out on the China Sea, immense gray bodies are floating, born in Roanoke, the ocean on both sides expanding, buoyed on the dense marine. Helicopters flutter overhead. The death bee is coming. Super sabers like knots of neurotic energy sweep around and return. This is Hamilton's triumph. This is the advantage of a centralized bank. B-52s come from Guam. All the teachers die in flames. The hopes of Tolstoy fall asleep in the antheap. Do not ask for mercy. Now the time has come to look into past tunnels. Like, just already, you guys, this is great. Like, immense gray bodies. Like, look at some of this language here talking about the bombs coming in and the gross national, the centralized banks. So good. Now the time has come to look into past tunnels. The hours given and taken in school, the scuffles in coat rooms. Foam leaps from his nostrils. Now we come to the scum you take from the mouths of the dead. Now we sit beside the dying and hold their hands. There is hardly time for goodbye. The staff sergeant from North Carolina is dying. You hold his hand. He knows the mansions of the dead are empty. He has an empty place inside him, created one night when his parents came home drunk. He uses half his skin to cover it as you tried to protect a balloon from sharp objects. I mean, talk about someone dying. This guy has an empty place inside him because of his parents, and he's using his skin to cover it as he's dying. And look at this contrast. So Robert Bly slows down here, then we speed up again. Artillery shells explode. Napalm canisters roll end over end. 800 steel pellets fly through the vegetable walls. The 6-hour infant puts his fist instinctively to his eyes to keep out the light. But the room explodes. The children explode. Blood leaps on the vegetable walls. Yes, I know. Blood leaps on the walls. Don't cry at that. Do you cry at the wind pouring out of Canada? Do you cry at the reeds shaken out at the edge of the sloughs? The Marine Battalion enters. This happens when the seasons change. This happens when the leaves begin to drop from the trees too early. Kill them. I don't want to see anything moving. This happens when the ice begins to show its teeth in the ponds. This happens when the heavy layers of lake water press down on the fish's head and send him deeper, where his tail swirls slowly and his brain passes him pictures of heavy reeds, of vegetation fallen on vegetation. Hamilton saw all this in detail. Every banana tree slashed, every cooking utensil smashed, every mattress cut. Now the Marines knife sweep around like sharp-edged jets. How beautifully they slash open the rice bags, the mattresses. Ducks are killed with $150 shotguns. Old women watch the soldiers as they move. And this is like a huge poem. There's like 10 of these sections. And like I was saying, that is depth. And then when you hear these guys perform, and they were great performers, like they did all this stuff live and like with a ton of practice and energy, like it's wild to hear. This type of stuff places both of them in the top 10. They weren't just artistic poets. They were poets trying to change the outcome of one of the more horrific things we did as Americans. They were trying to change our consciousness and send us away from MFA programs and versify and go back internal. And then they were elevating through their magazines and through their translations so many other poets. And that's why James Wright and Robert Bllee have to be in the top 10. And both have collected works. Here's the collected works of Robert Bllee. Down here is the collected works of James Wright, like complete works, I should say. So you can just go pay $20 and have their entire works, and you will be mind blown. You'll love it. Like you'll see the progression of the work. Like Robert Bllee starts with nature poetry, radical plainness. Then he does this crazy Jungian poem. Then he does anti-war poetry. Then he starts doing like ghazals and form poetry. It's a really good journey. Prose poetry. So next on our list is Robinson Jeffers, who is obviously an American poet born in 1887 and died in 1862 over in Central California by Carmel by the Sea. And Robinson Jeffers is the OG primordial poet. He was, first and foremost, an interesting guy. He didn't really like humans very much. Like he wasn't the most human poet, but he understood the voice of the world and of the soul, I think maybe better than anyone else ever. He was also a very stark and hardcore anti-interventionist. He didn't want us to go into World War I and even more radical, World War II. He was like, the Japanese attacked us because we provoked them. Like, why would we go kill so many of our countrymen for this European conflict? Which I think in retrospect, he was definitely right. World War II would have ended without us entering, with Germany still losing. So Jeffers' main goal with his work is, like I said, it's elemental. So people like Ezra Pound and William Carlos Williams, they had this idea that we needed to come back into contact with nature. But Jeffers believed that that wasn't enough, that just going out and looking at nature and writing about it wasn't enough, that we needed to unhumanize ourselves and reintegrate back with the earth. We needed to become nature. And like crazy concept, like really cool stuff. And like that's the perspective that he's writing from. And so we are first going to check out a poem named Hurt Hawks by Jeffers. So there it is, Hurt Hawks. The broken pillar of the wing jags from the clotted shoulder. The wings trail like a banner in defeat. No more used to the sky forever, but live with famine and pain a few days. Cat nor coyote will shorten the week of waiting for death. There is game without talons. He stands under the oak bush and waits, the lame feet of salvation. At night he remembers freedom and flies in a dream. The dawn ruins it. He is strong, and pain is worse to the strong. Incapacity is worse. The curs of the day come and torment him. At distance, no one but death, the Redeemer, will humble that head. The intrepid readiness, the terrible eyes. The wild God of the world is sometimes merciful to those that ask mercy, not often to the arrogant. You do not know him, you communal people, or you have forgotten him. Intemperate and savage, the hawk remembers him. Beautiful and wild, the hawks and men that are dying remember him. I'd sooner expect the penalties kill a man than a hawk, but the great red tail had nothing left but misery. From the bones too shattered for mending, the wing that trailed under his talons when he moved. We had fed him for 6 weeks. I gave him freedom. He wandered over the foreland hill and returned in the evening asking for death. Not like a beggar, still-eyed with the old implacable arrogance. I gave him the lead gift in the twilight. What fell was relaxed, al dawny, soft feminine feathers. But what soared, the fierce rush, the night herons by the flooded river, cried fear at its rising, before it was quiet, unsheathed from reality. Like, guys, like, I got tears in my eyes. Like, this is, do have a soft spot for animals and nature, but like, this is like, what the fuck are we writing now? Like this helps you remember, like, us communal people, us internet people, we forgot this shit. Like, we forgot what it feels like to be beautiful and to remember death, to remember the elemental world. Talk about Christianity kicking us out of the elemental world. We at least had to exist in it. Now, in our solipsism, in our atheism, in our radical, re-Christianity, like, oh my God, like in our technological prisons, we don't remember death. We don't remember the hawk. We don't remember nature. We don't remember any of this stuff. And this is why this poetry isn't popular. People don't care. I mean, as a collective, we have said, this isn't a plea that I'm not Greta saying we need to go wind energy only. But we've literally forgotten. We have no spiritual connection to ecology at all. It's just gone. Like, going on a hike and looking around, like, no, like, there's no animate anticipation and living in reciprocity with like our reality at all. And like, you know what? It's over. Like, the job is done. What are you going to do? But nonetheless, that's what Robinson Jeffers' poems and his life was doing. And that's one of the most American things ever, because he was living out, he built literally as a stonemason this house on the coast, Carmel by the Sea. You can go visit it. It's beautiful. He was out there for decades and no one was there. And then the yuppies came from San Francisco that wanted to escape, and the tourists, and he watched that happen. But America at its core had that opportunity. We lived with nature undisturbed as Westerners for the first time in a long time. Europe had been conquered, outside of these deep wooded areas. And men, again, were able to live with beauty and disconnection. And, it's wild, and that's something that we don't have anymore. We don't have that opportunity. And so shout out to Robinson Jeffers. So as you guys can see here, now we have Uncle Walt on the list. Shout out Walt Whitman. I have a certain preference for poetry. I like things that are actually real. I don't, John Berryman, all these dudes that go into these weird emotional states, I don't think are healthy for us. As a collective, our overthinking, our diving into all these malignant, odd personal emotions that don't go beyond the surface and don't touch the mythology and the deepness within, don't touch God. Like I said, I don't care if you're a Christian, who cares? Doesn't actually touch anything transcendent, has led to, that's why John Ashbery, Sylvia Plath, everyone who did that, Virginia Woolf, they all killed themselves. They were too focused on the stream of consciousness and the internal. Proust, like Dostoevsky, you don't want to be like them. Like, I know Cormac McCarthy was a weird dude, but like on the fiction realm, like, I would want to be like him more than many other people, like living his life, reclusive, spending time in nature, not like forsaking his values, like interested in many intellectual topics. Like, it's that lineage. That is like I said, that's one of the core values of being an American. And Walt Whitman is kind of the genesis of that for everyone. We could say it's Melville, but Melville, Whitman are the G's, and Whitman for poetry is. So what makes Walt Whitman really cool is obviously his fragmented epic poetry is great, but he made contact. He realized that we were all this one organism. He reconnected to, one could say, the sexual, the whole body of the universe, which really throws him into the canon of all poets, like even outside of preference, like him being able to do that by whatever means, which is crazy. Because if you look at his early career, he was just like writing like for newspapers and like random shit. And then out of nowhere, like just comes into this, sometimes these Satori awakenings happen. But something interesting about Whitman that I guess I could discuss really fast. I think he wasn't as good as he could have been because he didn't identify, and he actually started the tradition. So Whitman is so influential and so important to American poetry that he started the modernist tradition and helping people make contact. And he started like the John Berryman tradition of American kind of internal rumination poetry, in the sense that if you look at a lot of his work, it's like these casual observations. And Whitman didn't stand on the shoulders of any predecessor. He was very innovative in that sense. But what he ended up doing, and what he actually was tapping into, was there was this theme in like 17th and 18th century poetry where you were basically observing and cataloging through poetry. And Whitman like made that process much more epic. But that's in actuality what Rupi Kaur is doing. She just looks at this emotion or looks at this thing, looks at this problem in a marriage or whatever, and then just makes it a little bit more poetic. And they are observing, but they're not experiencing. And that's something interesting about Whitman's personal life, is that I didn't really see too much of this transformation, because being able to tap into everybody, it's somewhat of an elementary thing that can happen, like oneness, right? And like I said, for him, it was very innovative. And he's on the list, but this is why maybe he's not at the top of the list, is that he identifies with everyone. But Robinson Jeffers, because he has this soul perspective and it's strong. And so Whitman can get away with it because he was the first to do this at a very large level. But I think that, moving, and what's great about Whitman is that I could literally pick up Leaves of Grass or any of his work. I go to any line and I'm just right into beauty. Like, it's always good. As I could literally open up this Ezra Pound poem book right here, and he's talking about Caesar plotting against India. Like, this isn't interesting. I'm sure in the context of the poem at large it is, but you guys kind of get the point here. But I love Walt Whitman. I admire him. I like him for that I can just show him, pick it up, and like just be enthralled. I take Leaves of Grass with me on vacations a lot of the time because of that. I can just hop in and not need to like keep up with anything in its poetry. And yeah, so shout out to Walt Whitman. So we can't have a top 10 list without Wallace Stevens, who is, I think, very underread. So Wallace Stevens is one of the best and progenitor shadow poets. So, Robinson Jeffers, Robert Frost, Kenneth Rexroth, Marianne Moore, Ezra Pound, George Eliot, if I remember correctly. They were all born from like 1875 to 1900. And for whatever reason during that time, maybe someone, if you were still listening out there, is there anyone still there? Historically, I don't know why, but just in terms of America, all of them they were doing shadow work with their poetry. And I don't know if it's because they were just witnesses to the turn of the century and some of the crazy events like World War I and stuff. But if you look at them as a whole, it's very kind of dark and primordial. And so one of the reasons I love Stevens is that he is really into this idea of the senses and bringing the senses into his work. And, I remember, if I can remember correctly, like among the snowy mountain, the only thing moving was the eye of the blackbird. And Wallace, like Rilke and all these other people, they're really into this idea of sight. And Wallace says that I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just right after. And this is from his poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And if we look at the last one down here, it was evening all afternoon. It was snowing, and it was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the evening in the cedar limbs. And what's great about this is that look at the changes in light that he's doing here. There is a deepening darkness. And almost from the body at a psychic level, he can sense that it's going to snow more. It's dark in the afternoon. We've all been there where it's snowing, and it's going to continue to get darker. And then he ends it in that kind of classical tradition of, as I was saying earlier, many poets and a poetic technique is to focus on the self first and then end it with nature. So the original self or that psychic body fades away, or you start with nature and then build that up into identity. Like, either direction works, but it's a very effective technique. And so let's read some more Wallace Stevens poems. I measure myself against a tall tree. I find that I am much taller, for I reach right up to the sun with my eye, and I reach to the shore of the sea with my ear. Nevertheless, I dislike the way the ants crawl in and out of my shadow. So we are seeing shadow work being done here. Like another Stevens poem that I didn't put down that I'll just read to you really fast. He rode over Connecticut in a glass coach. Once a fear pierced him, in that he mistook the shadow of his equipage for blackbirds. And so this is him confronting the shadow in a momentary instance. And the poem we just read right here is doing something similar. What happens, this happens to us, if you're like a contemplative person or an open person, sometimes the shadow or this dark self or these inward things, the unconscious just springs up and into you out of nowhere. And that's what he's describing here. This is what Robert Frost and so many others love to do. It seemingly is like a technique. And something you'll notice in every one of these poems is that we have this touching of the senses. By this light, the salty fishes arch in the sea like tree branches, going in many directions, up and down. Or, the light is like a spider. The webs of your eyes are fastened to the flesh and bones of you as to rafters or grass. There are the filaments of your eyes on the surface of the water and in the edges of the snow. Like, look how he does this. Look how he merges weather and emotions and all this separation, passions of rain or moods in falling snow, grievings in loneliness or subdued elations when the forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights. Like, look at some of those images really fast. Pause this. It's wonderful. And now doing one last poem from Stevens. This one's called On the Road Home. And this is Stevens pushing back against Christianity and talking about how believing in Christianity can prevent the shadow from lifting up. And it's really good stuff. And it's titled On the Road Home. Quote, "It was when I said there's no such thing as the truth that the grape seemed fatter, the fox ran out of his hole," talking about kind of the Christian mono-truth. You said, there are many truths, but they are not part of a truth. Then the tree at night began to change. Smoking through green and smoking blue, we were two figures in a wood. We said we stood alone. It was when I said, words are not a form of a single word in the sum of the parts. There are only the parts. The world must be measured by the eye. It was when you said, the idols have seen lots of poverty, snakes and gold and lice, but not the truth. It was at that time that the silence was largest and longest. The night was roundest, the fragrance of the autumn warmest, closest and strongest. And I'm not reading these poems maybe the best right now, but like that is absolute fire, everyone. And so shout out to Wallace Stevens. He 100% belongs on this list. And so next on our list is Mary Oliver, who just died a couple of years ago. So did Robert Bllee. And Griselda has joined me. Mary Oliver is, once again, one of these poets, American poets, in this nature poetry tradition. We've produced so many good ones because of our public lands and the spaces. And like I said, the lineage that of Jeffers and Whitman and so many others. And Oliver in her work has a much softer feel. We did Mary Oliver over in the Wright Conscious Book Club, which, if you do not know, the Wright Conscious Book Club is the most active book club in the world. If you guys would like to support me and my work, over on Substack.com, I have literature courses, writing courses, and a book club that reads 6 to 10 transformative books a month. But we did Mary Oliver, and only like 2 people came to the call, and they were like, this is supposed to be good? Because they were expecting poetry to be this really epic thing. But Oliver is a master of presence, of things, of sound, of feminine slant rhymes, and layering in a way that really builds a poem that just makes you sit and be like, wow. Because if a poem, poems can do a lot of different things, but one of the more important things that a poem can do is bring you back to presence, renew your perspective, make you want to engage in some of the more positive aspects of your life. The things that help you grow the most, which for many of us are the exact same things. And here is a poem by Oliver named Wild Geese, and we'll read it right now. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And Oliver is a master of just writing clean poems like that. She's got so many books. She's got so many good poems that you can just pick up, open a page, and you'll find something like that. And you're just like, wow. Like I said, at a technical level, you can go to John Berryman, you can go to a million other people that are like versifying, but this, in my opinion, has substance. This makes me want to be better. This makes me want to remember. And in the long run, people like Oliver will be remembered. I've given Mary Oliver books to all type of people who have no experience with poetry, no experience reading, and they read it and they're like, wow, that was really good. What's the next book by her I should buy? But if I try to give Dream Songs or Leaves of Grass or many of these other works to even people who read fiction, they'd be like, I don't know about this. But you can't walk into Mary Oliver with a logic-coded mindset, or it's just not really going to work out. And so, of course, our second lady on the list is none other than Emily Dickinson, the famous reclusive author. And the first thing that Dickinson did was just blow up these ideas of form and Victorian poetry and everything else that was going on at the time. If you look at the mid-19th century and what was happening in poetry with Browning and all these other people, it was ridiculous. these oratorical, grandiose, epic poems that have this like morally direct message were just everywhere across the world. And Dickinson started to write elliptical and fragmented poetry that had odd uses of dashes that would make people say, oh my God, she's using ChatGPT now, and capitalization and just stuff that we today use all the time, but for her, in her time, was very odd. For instance, a short fragment of one of her poems reads, after a great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. That's fire for the 1800s, everyone. That is what so many poets today are trying to do with their witty Tumblr or Instagram poetry. And it's not even that epic. Like, that's what's so funny about poetry, is that there are many novelists today that are just smacking around in terms of actual objective quality, what people did. Even like Melville. Like, there are authors today writing in English that are, in my opinion, like better. And Melville is awesome. But when it comes to poetry, there are people sometimes in the 19th century and you're like, damn, pound for pound, they're better than many people today. And Dickinson, a lot of the time, as we just saw, was not just writing, but, and I think it was partially because she was reclusive and not necessarily writing for anyone. She was willing to explore the ontological depths. She was willing to talk about her doubts, immortality, her own death, and many other things with the sense of openness, not being connected to Christianity or atheism or any of these other things, just exploring through it all. And she had just as much of an influence, if not more, depending on how you look at it, on American poetry than Walt Whitman. She really helped us divorce and move beyond the influence of Britain and become and build our own identity. And that's why she has to be in the top 10. Plus, you will occasionally, if you read through her poems, find some fire in there. So another interesting question, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts. Do we count T.S. Eliot here? In the sense that he only spent 25 years of his life in America, was raised here, but spent the last 51 in England and wrote all of his masterpieces over there. And if you asked him, like, are you American or British? He would say British. He revoked his U.S. citizenship. And so because of that, we only have two choices from the classic group of American modernist poets, William Carlos Williams or Ezra Pound. Both are, in my opinion, really good selections. But you guys already know, we got to go with Ezra Pound, even though I love William Carlos Williams. And everyone should go read Imaginations by him, which includes Cora and Hell, Spring and All, The Descent of Winter, and some other stuff, this is like one of the best guides to creative writing and writing poetry out there. It's like really good stuff. Look, there's an old photo in here as a bookmark. Me at the Liberty Bell with my mom. Also have some old highlights. I was reading this in the bath. I used to take like a nice bath every day and read. This got water damage for sure. But nonetheless, Ezra Pound, for his scope, when you look at what everything Ezra was doing, in like the cantos and all of that, it really was a predecessor to some of the American epics that were forthcoming. He really was at the top of the pile in terms of pushing American poetic thought and helping others and really being active in the community. And even though he went a little bit off the rails at the end of his life and was unjustly, held in a mental asylum because he believed in fascism, he is most single-handedly, if we could pick one person, who liberated us from the Victorian disease. He started to find these ideas and understand that, quote, the image is not an idea. It is a radiant node or cluster. Because William Carlos Williams was saying, no ideas but in things, no ideas but in things. Focus on things and the ideas will come. But Pound saw beyond the things and into the energy of them. It's a radical thinker. There's not many other poets that have treatises on economics, even though it's insane, and other things. I had a professor once tell me about Pound that he's probably the most talented, he had the most unrealized talent of any poet ever. If he didn't go on so many transgressions and stuff, his poetry would be considered like canonical. And I too agree with that. And Pound ends his cantos with two of the hardest stanzas ever in poetry. And he writes, I have tried to write paradise. Do not move, let the wind speak. That is paradise. Let the gods forgive what I have made. Let those I love try to forgive what I have made. Like, damn, that is a way to close out the show. So next we have Gary Snyder, who is the only living poet who is on our list today. And Snyder is the living lineage holder of a lot of these people I'm talking about. Snyder was in the Beat generation. He was featured as one of the characters in Kerouac's Dharma Bums. He was friends with everyone, but eventually he went to Japan to study as a monk and has kind of taken the torch of Jeffers and Kenneth Rexroth, Whitman, and all these nature poets and continued forward. He has so many great translations and poems and is our most treasured nature poet right now. And, kind of one of the bigger ones of the 20th century because he's been doing this his entire life and has so much work out there, has helped so many people. I remember seeing him speak once. I also saw his wife, Joanne Kiger. She is kind of a forgotten great American poet. Joanne Kiger really has some great stuff. I really need to make a top 50 list. There's so many other people that have really good books. Just something that came to my head. There's a lady named Diane DePrima who has a book called Revolutionary Letters. It's really good. A lot of her other stuff isn't very good in my opinion, but she's one of these kind of revolutionary New York poets that wrote something I thought was really good. Amiri Baraka. There's so many random socialist New York poets that were good. There are so many Midwestern poets and Spanish, Latin poets in California. There's so many random people. But let's now hear from Gary Snyder and let me give you guys kind of a feel of some of his work. So I just found a random document with a poem that I wanted to read, and the one before it reads, "This present moment that lives on to become long ago." And here's one that I like called "Burning the Small Dead." Burning the small dead, branches broke from beneath thick spreading white bark pine. 100 summers, snow melt, rock and air, hiss in a twisted bow. Sierra granite, Mount Ritter, black rock twice as old. Is a really good book on integrating nature and writing into your life and a bunch of other cool stuff. Really good, really fun stuff to contemplate over here. This pile of books is getting messier and messier. My wife walked out here and she's like, "Oh my God, this looks like you just dumped your backpack out." And it's oops. So I know many of you guys will be disappointed and you guys have no idea who the fuck this is. But like I said, I could have included T.S. Eliot, William Carlos Williams, Denise Levertov, Marianne Moore, Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, Sylvia Plath, even Wendell Berry, N. Scott Momaday, John Asbury, John Berryman, E.E. Cummings, Anne Sexton. I remember repeating people, Robert Lowell. But W.S. Merwin has a deep spot in my heart because he was a conventional poet, one could say. Just not your everyday type of dude, but he was writing traditional poetry and fairy tale poetry. He has a great poem everyone needs to read. It's one of my favorites of all time. It's too long to really show because you kind of have to read the entire thing. It's titled East of the Sun and West of the Moon by W.S. Merwin, who this is. But sometime in the middle of his life, he had this spiritual kind of revelation and started writing a different type of poetry that, in my opinion, is really, really good.